We're live. How about that? That's how
Hello,
fast it
everybody.
was.
Welcome to Roll for Combat Live emergency episode.
Yes. I can't believe you said you saw
Welcome
this a
to
couple.
Roll for Combat Live emergency
saw this,
episode 3 or 4 hours ago,
I
and
can't
I was
believe
like,
you said
yeah,
you
we're
saw
going
this
to
a
need
couple-
to cover this eventually.
Got it.
But I didn't think that we needed to come on today.
Well, it just happened, and people probably want to know, and they didn't want to wait till Wednesday. Plus, I have something planned because I was going to get the new Vecna book tomorrow, and then I do a review.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. I didn't know that. I figured this would be a perfect topic for Wednesday, and I put it in my list. So, just for everyone who's tuning in, Wizards has announced the SRD situation, and it's looking pretty good from the announcement that they gave, assuming that they follow through on this announcement. So basically, they're going to put out an SRD 5.2 that updates the 5.1 to the 2024 revision. And 5.2 is going to be CCBY 4.0 only, where 5.1 was in both OGL and CCBY. So that means that when it comes to 5.2, it's only in CCBY. However, CCBY is very easy to use. It doesn't even have the share alike. You can just include it in there. So it's impossible, as far as I can tell, as far as anyone could tell, for Wizards to like take it out or change it once it's in CCBY. That's pretty ironclad. It's going to be irrevocable.
Well,
so once it releases, they said they are not doing anything to the original SRD 5.1. You can still use it if you want. And they're waiting for all the books to come out for the 5.2, which is pretty reasonable. Then until they have the full set, then they can figure out how to format and put it out. It's going to, they're calling it 5.2 because they want to emphasize that the D&D 2024 1 D&D stuff is still, the same edition with updates, which is kind of what they've been saying before. They're planning on localizing it in languages that are supported, which I suppose, since they're not supporting Brazilian Portuguese, will not include that. Or maybe it will. I don't know. They didn't say. Maybe because if they're doing digital versions. Then it mentions SRDs for previous editions, which they said they were going to do, and then they could have left it off and just not put it on there, but they haven't done it. But they did mention they're getting to it.
So you are speaking like everyone here knows exactly what you're talking about. So why don't you quickly explain? Because there's really two aspects to all of this. There's the OGL, which is the license to make the books and sort of go. We explained all of that, and the OGL has to do with actually publicating and sharing the books and who has rights to the material within the books and reprinting the books, and that's for anyone. And the SRD is a systems reference document, which is specific to D&D or an actual system itself, which is why it's called the system. The OGL, like for example, can be put on anything. Anyone can use an OGL. Like we use an OGL in our products, and almost anyone who publishes pretty much uses, not pretty much, but most people use an OGL or the OGL.
To make it even clearer how the OGL differs, the OGL was so broad that even game systems that didn't even remotely use anything from D&D, like Fudge and Fate switched off of it eventually because they didn't want to be reliant on it. They just used the SRD for a while. No, not the SRD. Sorry, the OGL, the Open Game License, for a while. That is a license, whereas the source reference document, like Steven said, is the big document. It's got all of the info that Wizards put out from their core books that you are allowed to use under the OGL.
Right. It's
under the Open Game License.
It's a rule set that's common. So it's basically, here's the rules that you're allowed to use in your products. So it's like a subset. It's not really a subset, but for your mind's eye, it's a little easier to picture it that way. So the system rules document, SRD, systems reference document,
yes,
contains the core rules for Dungeons and Dragons, including classes and monsters. And according to, if you read right here, it's intended to serve as a foundation for your 5th edition D&D compatible creations. Why this is important is that you can publish something using the SRD rules no matter what. Like you can don't need to use OGL. It's like it's in Creative Commons. So it's basically these are rules that anyone can use, and you can use them however you want in any of your published material. And it doesn't include, it never does, it never includes lore. And they even
That's
say in
right.
this that lore is, if you want to use lore, you have to use the DM's Guild, where you can use lore, but then you got to give them 50% of your profits, and they own all your products.
Yeah.
So that's the downside.
That's
Or,
completely normal, though.
yeah, no, it's
Nobody should
normal.
get worried about that and be like, oh no,
No,
it says it
no,
doesn't have
that's,
lore. That's always how it's been
yeah.
in the OGL and every other version. That's kind of the point of it, is like use the rules, use the framework, but the holder of the intellectual property still is going to be the person who owns the lore, the proper names, the characters that they create.
So why this is important and why I decided to go live in like literally 15 minutes after I read this, even though this came out 4 hours ago and no one told me about it, is that they do a couple of things here. Like, I like to read behind the scenes and understand like what they're thinking, as you guys all know. And I'm looking at this, and they did a couple of things. First, they're calling in the SRD 5.2. So the current one is 5.1, and they're going to update it to 5.2. And they even say why they're doing it, why it's not a 6.0. And they're in their mind that this is an expansion on the 5th edition rules. Hence, we're just adding a new subset. We're making it go to 5.2, which is good, which means that they really are thinking these new rules is just an expansion on 5th edition, and it's not going to be a 6th edition. Say what you will about that, but they don't picture it that way, which will be very interesting when they finally do release a new OGL, because I've been saying this for a while. It's like, how can it's very hard to have a brand new OGL that's restrictive and still have this new SRD 5.2. Maybe they can do it, but
I think they're not going to.
I don't think so either. It's going to be very
And we even guessed
hard.
that. Even on a very recent episode, people asked us to guess.
Yeah.
And like, are they going to go back? Are they going to try to put that in? Because they could. They absolutely could legally. There's not any even gray area where there was before when they were trying to revoke the OGL.
Right.
That if they wanted a new edition or version of D&D to be under a restrictive license, it absolutely could have been. But our guess was that after what happened before, it was very bad press for them. There was an outcry. Obviously, we were, a lot of us were there, and we were part of that. And it just seemed like they weren't going to. That was what I guessed. And I said, maybe I'm an over optimist, but you can come back to this video and tell me I was wrong if they wind up doing it. And it looks like I was right this time. And Stephen, you kind of agreed too.
Well, just because, we're going through this ourselves with Pathfinder and Orc, so you and I know firsthand how difficult this is. Like, it's like you either do a clean break or you don't. And Pathfinder, and it's not a bad thing, it's working for them. They did not do a clean break. They're kind of doing Pathfinder 2.5, or it's not even 2.5, 2.1, where it's like post remastered and pre remastered, but they use different licenses. And because of that, you can't mix and match them. You can't use Pathfinder 2.0 material with remastered. They're completely separate.
Because it's two licenses, and one of the licenses is not Creative Commons, which is a little less restrictive. Both the Orc and the OGL license don't want to play with each other very much. So if you want to include both materials in your product, you would have to have like a clearly designated, like a magazine with multiple articles, or like an appendix in the back that has the other content or something like that. They can't just be mixed, intermingled throughout the book. In a way that it seems like, and I'm not a lawyer, so nobody take legal advice from me on these licenses, talk to your own lawyer, but it seems like because the CCBY is so flexible, that you would be able to use the 5.2 stuff from the CCBY while maybe still including the OGL in the product if you needed some OGL content that was somewhere else.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean,
I think so. I think that's what people concluded when they were looking at it back before 5.2. In 5.1, if they wanted to use both, that because Creative Commons is pretty chill, that it would be okay. Whereas with Orc and OGL, they are not chill with each other, and you have to separate them out in your product.
By the way, CCBY 4.0, it's a Creative Commons license, so there's all these different types. So when you keep hearing that, if you have no idea what we're talking about, it's just a license, and it's a license.
The reason I'm giving the specific is because you can't just say Creative Commons. It's one thing I learned. I didn't know this until D&D went into there, and I looked through all of them, but some of the Creative Commons licenses are really, really, really open, and some of them are actually really, really restrictive. And so if you just say Creative Commons and you don't specify, some people will think it's the most restrictive, and some people will think it's the least restrictive of those choices.
So anyhow, you can go on D&D Beyond. I mean, I have the article up right here, and you can see, what they said here. And I mean, even just the tone. I mean, just reading this, it's like the tone is very upbeat. The tone is very like they're not trying to pull anything over. They're very explanatory. They're making everything Creative Commons. They even mentioned what about the other, previous editions if they're going to be putting 4th edition, 3rd. And we talked about this just in last week's topic about how by doing what they're doing and going so heavily onto creative tools and kind of soft gating everything by making people kind of use online tools to use Dungeons and Dragons. They're not forcing people, but it sure is hard, and it's going to get harder and harder to use use any version of D&D without using an online tool set. I think they're going to be very comfortable opening up 3.5 or even 4th edition, or more 4th edition, because that's one everyone keeps asking about, and that's under a very strict license to Creative Commons, because where are you going to play it? It's like, okay, you can play it. First of all, 4th edition was incredibly hard. Like, I used the online character creator. I don't know if you remember that. They had this whole character creator. And man, it's like if you weren't using that character creator, it was impossible. It was nearly impossible to create a good character. There was so many rules and sub rules and subsystems and subsets. I remember that. I remember when I was actually a player in that, and I was like, how are you ever going to make a 4th edition character without this tool? It's impossible. So I have a feeling it's gotten to the point that they're like, yeah, sure, open it up.
And they even said before they were going to. Yeah, just that there was no visible progress on it for a long time. So some people were skeptical of how much they prioritized it, but they didn't have to include in this update that was talking about 5.2 that we're still working on it. We're going to do it after 5.2. They could have just kind of quietly left it out, and they didn't. And I also think this was a good update, like you said, Stephen, with the wording, and that it seems very forthright and it's covering all the bases. The upbeatness doesn't matter as much to me because I felt like they were somehow able to be upbeat even when they were talking about like some of the bad change ideas that they had done in the past. They somehow did it in an upbeat way and tried to spin it positive. But upbeatness not mattering to me, I still think this was a really, really, it was well written. It was upfront. It didn't try to hide anything, at least as far as I can tell. And it looks like a good decision that means my optimism was warranted.
Well, let's get. There's a few things in here. So, interesting where they said, will the SRD be localized? So I've been saying for a while, because everyone keeps going on and on about how, and look, I'm not minimizing it, that they're not printing these books in, other languages as much now, and that they're starting to, pull out of markets. I actually was just talking to my warehouse this morning, and he was telling me once again, hey, what a surprise, the prices of boxes went up again. And
again?
They keep going, like the prices, everything keeps going up. And the thing is that the books...
Is there any top on this price increase that just keeps going up?
Nope. And he used to get, just to give you an idea, like he would get, I don't know, a couple of 100 or 1,000 boxes. Well, no, it was the boxes that you get, like the regular, brown boxes. It was like 10 cents a box he was paying. And he says it went up to, I think, like 30 or 50 cents a box. And he said it raised, I think it was up to 50 cents, but it's now like, I think it's like 60 cents. Like, it's not even, it's like 600% increase, it's like 500% increase. These are huge increases if you go by that percentage. And the problem is that they're selling these hardcover books for 70, 80, $90 now. And that's not even for special editions. That's just like what everyone's,
Yeah.
has to pay. And in America, it's a lot. And the problem is that if they try to sell it in some of these other countries, that comes out to, after you do the conversion rate based on, annual salaries, that's like it could be $1,000,
Yeah,
like,
it is a huge amount. I know
yeah,
from
it's a huge amount.
like Brazilian fans talking, like buying our products or other things like that. It's very difficult,
Yeah,
and it's very expensive with the conversion.
Yeah. And there's not much we can do because the price is the price. And you can do that for digital products. Like you can adjust pricing for digital products, but not for really, you can't really do anything about physical products. And on top of that, since it's a smaller, to make it even worse, because they print up a much smaller print run in another language, it's even more expensive. So it costs them more to print. So it's I'm not defending them, but I understand where they're coming from. And what I think they're going to do, and what they probably will do, is that, and this is one of the good things about going digital, is that you can very easily have the rule books in every language known to mankind. You can have it in these other languages, and then you can have the rule books available for a very reasonable amount of money if you're getting them in Portuguese, on D&D Beyond, and maybe they only cost, instead of, hundreds of dollars, it only costs $10 locally. Like Netflix does this. Like Netflix has more or less the same price percentage wise in different countries, and some countries, like in America, it might be, say, $15 a month, but in another country, it might be $5 a month or $3 a month, compared to America, but based on the salaries and the amount people make per month is really where they're deciding that this goes. So I read that as that this has to do mostly with the digital editions, and that, yeah, now I'm very interested. I'm very curious. I can't wait to see these books. It really looks like they are just going to update 5th edition. And with that being said,
That's what they've been saying the whole time.
I know,
but I mean, it's hard to tell exactly what's. I mean, maybe not the whole time, of course, because at first there was the whole getting rid or like taking control of D&D Beyond by upselling it a little bit more as being a bigger change. But for a long time, they've been saying that, and you've been saying, well, no, it has to be a whole 6th edition, and I always felt like it's going to be hard to say it until we look at how much they're actually changing.
Well, what I'm curious is that they are going to change the classes, and that makes sense. And they're updating them, and they've been talking a lot about that.
Some of those changes are pretty major.
No, they are major, and that's fine. That makes sense. But I'm actually very curious about, like, they said they were going to change the magic system and magic items and how they work in the economy. And they haven't said anything about that. So that's what I'm really curious about, because I'm like,
should be interesting.
Yeah, like that really could affect the game massively. And it can be done because World of Warcraft has done this more than once, where they basically, the numbers were getting to the point, like, when people were like level 70 or an 80 and 90, and people were doing billions of points of damages, they did the crunch, where they said, okay, we're taking everyone's numbers and we're dividing it by like 10,000, so suddenly instead of doing 10 million points of damage, you were doing 10,000 points of damage. So it was kind of the same, and they just brought it all the way down, and so the numbers kind of stayed the same, but and they redid all the math. And I could see them doing that because the numbers at the highest levels get insane with the amount of gold. You start off with like 30 gold, and then by the time you're 15th level, you're getting 300,000 gold pieces. It goes like exponential. It's supposed to linear the amount of gold. So I'm very curious. And yeah, the D&D magic items are not balanced at all. And they didn't really think of it. And you can tell it's like they have it just like, you get magic when you get magic. Don't worry about gold so much. It just sort of was supposed to be very loosey goosey, and who cares? Don't worry about it. You get stuff when you get it, and just have fun and play the game. But people want that. People, that's a big part of the game. It always surprised me. That's what I'm most interested in. But that's really all the news we have. It was just sort of a quick emergency to go on and say that the SRD is going to be Creative Commons for the new books, which means anyone will be able to use it. Anyone will be able to use the new rules, which is really good. And you'll be able to put it all in your products, which is really important to people like me who publish for a living and want to make sure we can use the new rules. Obviously, there's no new OGL, but looks like they're probably going to keep the OGL sort of the same. I put it this way. They could make a new drastic, very restrictive one. I don't know. I'm only half. I'm half holding my breath because I have a feeling maybe they're like, okay, well, the OGL is the same for printed materials, but for digital, it's restrictive or something. Like, I can see them still trying to do some shenanigans.
Once they put it in the CCBY, that's it. Unless you're saying
That's
the
true.
CCBY, but
No, that's true.
SRD that they put out will specify some very specific terms, which normally you can't just put in an SRD.
No,
You'd have to
you're
put
right.
in a license.
Yeah. So, real quick, I do want to mention this because everyone's been talking about this. I don't know. I didn't realize how much of a big deal this was. Um, so we mentioned very quickly last week that D&D Beyond no longer allows you to buy piecemeal classes and
Yep.
subclasses.
It is in our last episode. We had a bit of a discussion about it.
Well, I've been hearing since then people are like losing their minds on this.
There's some people who are very, very upset about it.
Yeah.
I honestly think that it was a good thing. It was good on WoTC that they were offering that before. Many companies can't afford to do so or can't get it to work to be able to do that. Almost nobody else was even offering that. And it's not good on them, I guess, that they're taking it away, but that's mostly just putting them down to where the industry standard is for books, that it's not able to be offered piecemeal.
Yeah. I get it, because a lot of times, especially with D&D books, a new race in a lot of D&D books is one page. And maybe you literally just want one new race. And you're paying, you will pay the $2.99 for that race, and that's it. You don't want to pay 50-60 bucks for the entire book.
It feels like it would have been a good way for them to make money, that they got it implemented and it works as microtransactions where people would be willing to splurge a few bucks for one subclass that they're playing, who would ordinarily, that maybe that person would never have bought anything. Because the full book prices were too high for them. I mean, I'm obviously not sitting behind their number counting desk, but I would have thought that would have been an exceptionally good thing for them in terms of making money. And but that would be technically difficult to implement.
It's very difficult to implement, and I was always surprised they did it. I can see the uproar because people look, if you can get things a la carte, it's a lot easier. And I mean, how many times have you I've seen this happen a million times where I used to do this where I would need, when I was doing minis and I was actually, playing games in actual, person, and I would buy minis and I'm like, okay, I literally just need this one monster. But then the monster came in a set. So I'm like, oh, all I need is this one monster. I don't want to buy a set of 10 monsters, and then you're stuck with all the others. And so you figure out, and this would happen to me a lot. So I would have to go buy, whatever the $20, $30, $40 set at my local flag and get all the monsters. And I'm like, okay, I got the one I need for tonight's game. And that's actually why I would go to the conventions, and I loved when people would sell, individual minis broken out. So I kind of get it. I totally get it, but I'm not a player, so I'm a DM, so I buy everything anyhow, like I buy the full books. So I can't think of it from the player point of view as much, and I totally see it. But also, D&D, they were the only ones allowing this. It's extremely rare. I can't think of anyone else that really allowed you just to buy things piecemeal. And from a technical point of view, it's such a pain in the neck to deal with. I totally get it, and maybe they just don't want to. It stinks, that they're
It
forcing
must have
you?
been a moneymaker, so it must. I can't. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it somehow lost money, or they. But I feel like it was the technical load, or something, or a new implementation of things made it harder to do. Like I don't see any reason, especially since it's something people used to have that they're taking away, right? And so
Mhm.
there's going to be blowback about it, even though it is actually like more advanced than what other TTRPG companies could have offered in terms of being able to take it piecemeal.
Yeah, so the big thing is I don't know what to say. I feel bad, and I feel like this was great for people when it lasted, but all good things come to an end, unfortunately. And I almost hate to say it, but I almost don't fault WoTC on this one because it's a real nightmare to implement all of that. Especially, I can see why too. If they're going to be updating the old rules, if they're going to have to
Oh, and then they have to update every individual
yes,
singleton purchase
yes,
separately.
yes.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
No, you're talking to someone. Look, so we just create. So we ourselves did this, where we have Battlezoo Year of Monsters, and we came out with 12 individual PDFs for 5e and Pathfinder of 12 new ancestries or races, and now we have Battlezoo Ancestries Classic Creatures
Classic
coming out,
creatures.
which is a compilation of all of them. And the changes that we have, we have hundreds and hundreds of changes for everything to the point that we don't even know, like, we're actually telling people, like, when we're doing the path builder, like, you might just have to start over because there's so many new things, especially some classes where some feats were deleted. So we even deleted a few feats. So, and there's so many new options that it's very hard to do an update, and it's very hard to go from version 1 to version 2. And if they're going to be completely redoing these classes, how do you do that? Like, it's almost, they're going to have to do the same thing. It's like they either have to go back to the old and reprogram all of that, which is
Some
a
of theirs are probably
nightmare.
even more difficult
Oh,
because
yeah.
of the fact that changing the fundamental underpinnings of a class is a lot more of a pain than like
Mhm.
removing a feat and adding a feat
No,
somewhere.
it's so they're like they're just trying to do a clean break and say, look, because this is an update, you have two options. You can either continue using the old material that you have, or you have to upgrade and do a clean update to your character and just start over. And as someone who's been doing this a long time, that happens a lot. Like when I went from 3 to 3.5, and even now our we're not using Pathfinder remastered. We're using the existing rules. But a lot of people had to redo their characters, and they just started over from scratch. They didn't like try to go in if they had a 15th level character of like, let me fix this, let me fix that. It's like, let's just start over, and I'll try to build it more or less the same. But I might make a few changes, and I think they're just doing that. I think it's more of a technical point of view. I think it's more of a technical issue than you might think. That they're looking at this and saying, ugh, it's
I
just too
think you're
hard.
probably right.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of super chats. Lord
Yes.
of the Unfinished Project said that it felt disappointing to them as someone who was tired with 5e. And Yvette Sitlington said, sorry for being unrelated. I'm never online at the same time. I know that Fantasy Grounds, or it says FG, I think Fantasy
It's
Grounds, have
Fantasy
been difficult
Grounds.
about it, but will we ever see Battlezoo products on FGU again?
Yeah. So the way it works with fantasy, yes, I'm gonna get stuff on Fantasy Grounds. Fantasy Grounds is weird because what happens is that you put out your product and someone claims it and then they'll do it. And if they don't do it, I've had to wait like months or years for someone to like update it. And I have no control over it. So I actually do have the Year of Monsters done for Fantasy Grounds, but now Classic Creatures is coming out. So I kind of wanted to wait until Classic Creatures because we're going to have to update everything. So I will have Classic Creatures updated. As for the others, I'll put it this way: if anyone is out there and wants to do Fantasy Ground development, let me know because I actually am looking for Fantasy Ground developers, really good ones that want to take the products, and you get like a percentage of the sales. That's how Fantasy Grounds work. Fantasy Grounds is interesting models that people volunteer to actually take the product and update it, and then they get a piece of the sale, and Fantasy Ground gets a piece of the sale, and then I get a piece of the sale. So everyone gets a piece. So they have, it's an incentive for people to take content and convert it over. So, but it's a small portion compared to Foundry and Roll20. It's very small. So it's not been the highest priority. And I had some, I wouldn't say bad experiences, but it just took like, oh, I don't know, like 2 years for them to finish Dragons. So, it kind of fell off the radar after 2 years. I was like, oh yeah, really? Is that still a thing? But then they finished it. And I was like, thank God. So now I just have to get back on it. We did have a question says, any idea on the new SRD? I don't know what that means, but the SRD is supposed to come out with the new. I think they said when all the books are released.
Yes, once the last one is out, that's when they're going to put it out. And I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes
be a little weird too, since some of them may reference into the others and the way that they would put out the SRD.
Mm-hmm.
Like, arguably, maybe there would be something, there wouldn't be that much in the monster manual that affects things, but it would be wild to try to put it in with like just the Players Handbook and not the Dungeon Master's Guide. And so it makes sense to wait until the core books are out.
Oh, I see. So Yvette said they really like Eldamon, but they don't have time to port it over to Fantasy Grounds. It's actually, you don't need to port. Here's the thing. You don't need to port everything, okay? You really don't. You only need to port over what people are using. And as someone who's done this quite a bit, like I used to set up monsters in VTTs all the time, and I would set up everything. Now when I set up monsters, I set up, this is all I set up. I set up their hit points, their AC, their saves, and their attacks. And that's it. That's all I say. Everything else, the spells are done manually. The attacks are in there because you want the attacks to work. Sometimes the spells are in there. Sometimes I could automate the spells. And obviously you want the saves and the hit points and the AC, but that's it. Like, you don't need to put anything else in. So if you want an Eldamon and you know that it's like, okay, they're first level, okay, well then put in enough for them to, do first level, put in enough feats and powers for them. And then if you know they have like one Eldamon or two Eldamon, just put in those two. That's it. You don't need to put in 162 Eldamon. You just need to put in what they're using.
If you want to see an example of that kind of kit bashing, there was the time that Steven invited me to join him on an actual play of Dragons with like, I feel like it was like a half an hour before the actual play. And so it was a 12th or 13th, some really high level dragon thing. And I wound up making a water elemental avatar in Foundry, which does not have that class implemented in that intervening time frame, just by exactly like Steven said. I kit bashed it in. I just gave myself bonus hit points until my hit points were the right number. I did the same for my other statistics. And then I just knew what my powers were. That won't always work though, because I understood the class. And if that is the GM and the other players rely on Fantasy Grounds automation to understand their character because they don't know how to do the things without it, it's going to be a little bit trickier. But even then, like you said, Steven, you might be able to code a little more and just maybe not something you can do in 10 minutes and get a 13th level character.
Yeah, that's the thing. Especially if they're starting low level, you can get that in very quickly. By the way, you asked Yvette if Battlezoo can offer tokens, icons, digital packs separately from the PDFs. Well, the PDFs come with digital tokens. Comes with everything.
Yeah, that's what the art asset, the digital assets are. That it always says in like pretty much every Battlezoo purchase you get will say it comes with this and that and the other, and also digital assets. And normally the amount of digital assets Steven just gives everyone for free. If you look at like the Foundry Paizo Bestiary digital assets, like they charge a pretty decent amount for just getting those digital assets separately. I mean, there's a lot in that. They're very, very good. Steven always gives that for free on any purchase. And so yeah, you can just get it.
There's a very big update to Eldamon coming up very soon. There's going to be a version 3 coming out, and there's going to be a new token. We have new token packs and icons for all the Eldamon. So we have new tokens, a new pack, and a big update. I've been waiting. for that because creative classic creatures is almost done. I'm like very close. I'm actually going to probably release a beta version because one thing that happens is when it goes through Foundry and Path Builder, we usually find a few more things. So
Hmm.
I don't want to put it through. I don't want to release 1.0 just yet because this one has so many updates to existing content that we're finding things that we can miss easily. So this is a it's not an official update, but it's pretty close. It's like an unofficial official, but I also don't want people to wait because it's pretty close to done.
We could
So
at least show it to the advocates of monsters if that has gone through enough to put that up
oh
there.
well, I actually am probably just going to release
Because
it
we have
as plain
legendary
vanilla.
heralds from that other previous legends one, but we also have the advocate of monsters
Mm-hmm.
tier that once like that should have had like all the charges and things go through on it, I suspect. So we could like create that
Mm-hmm.
set and give them early access to things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got to look into that. So um, anyhow, and yeah, people are like coming in now, seeing the news. So the news is it's probably pretty good. It's
Yeah.
probably pretty good.
All things look all indications are good. We'll have to hold out like a final thoughts until it actually comes out because like you said, Stephen, maybe there's some kind of limitation on it, but I continue to be optimistic like I was last week when people asked what they thought was going to happen with that. This is what I expected, like pretty much exactly, other than the fact that I didn't think they were going to be upfront and talking about the older edition ones and how they hadn't done progress on it yet, and they were, which I'm pleasantly surprised. So I'm now continuing to be optimistic about it.
By the way, real quick. So Kickstarter gave us the option like 2 days before ours ended that they have this new feature in Kickstarter where you can keep late pledges open. I used to do this anyhow. I used to have it after the Kickstarter ended. I would put the books up on Battlezoo and then you can order there, pre-order them. But you would have to pay full price and it would be the regular pricing and you couldn't get tiers. But Kickstarter invited us to this beta where you can continue to pledge. And you can actually have different prices. I didn't do that. But if you want to get the Battlezoo Secret Dragon books, I'm going to keep it open for a little bit longer at the original prices. You can, and just go to Kickstarter rollforcombat.com. Otherwise, I am going to take it down pretty soon, just because it looks like a few people got in there who missed out or just waited a little bit too long. But then I will have it available for pre-order on battlezoo.com. But it's going to be a lot more expensive because we can't do tiers really on Battlezoo. It's it's not the same as Kickstarter. It's not like Kickstarter where you group all the tiers. Like, I mean, of course, I could do that, but it gets really messy and confusing. So it's really you could buy the individual books or the individual products on Battlezoo or pre-order them. So if you wanna get them cheap and early and as fast as possible, just go to the Kickstarter because we're one of the few people testing out this new feature, and it's actually pretty interesting. My favorite part is I can keep once the Kickstarter ends, you couldn't edit anything. It was actually kind of a pain in the neck. But now you can edit everything. I was like, this is the best part. I was like, oh, I can still edit things now. Because before it was like the Kickstarter ended and it would literally like put a gate down and like, you're done. Nothing can be touched. So you get like weird things in your Kickstarter and like weird messages and sometimes you have images in there you don't want, but I can continue to fix it. So anyhow, we will have our regular show unless there's more news that comes out on Wednesday. And as I said, one thing I'm going to probably do is I the your local game stores are releasing Eva Vecna tomorrow, so you can buy the book. And man, I have to. I'm very curious because it has Vecna, it has a rod of 7 parts. I saw the list of monsters, and the list of monsters in this book is like a who's who of famous monsters and famous creatures. I mean, it basically sounds almost like not an updated Age of Worms, but kind of an Age of Worms like esque adventure. That I was like, all right, I gotta see this because it's levels 10 to 20, so it's high level, and you jump around the multiverse, and you're like encountering legendary creatures from D&D history. So I think I might get it and read it in one day, and then give her a review, which I've never done before. But I
It can be fun. to
Yeah.
do
Well,
those.
I can
I'd
read
be
this
very
thing down.
curious to hear about it and to talk about it with you from the perspective of a person who does not have it but is very familiar with some adventure design from working on the sausage from inside the factory.
Well, I'm also interested. I like to see these adventures when they do 10th to 20th, because first, I'm not going to say first to 10th or low level adventures are all the same, but let's just say they go through a lot of similar tropes. They often will do the same things because you have to, especially at the lowest levels, so you don't kill everyone out off. So they often will have like social encounters and things like that at the lowest levels, and not as much combat. So it's sort of you start seeing it after a while, but you start at 10th level, you can get pretty nuts. And if you want to look for spoilers, there's spoilers out there. So people have posted the table of contents, and people have in the table of contents and lists the monsters that are in the table of contents, and it is like, I'm not going to spoil it here, but it is every famous creature of D&D is like in the table of contents. I was like, okay, I gotta see this thing. I'm like, I gotta read this thing because I love the lore. I love to hang out and just kick back with, oh, here's Strahd and Tiamat and Vecna. Hey, let's just go have lunch. I mean, it's like it's very cool. I'm like a sucker for that. And also, the Rod of Seven Parts is one of the coolest pieces of magic. That's like up there. I would say Deck of Many Things is probably my favorite, but the Rod of Seven Parts is like probably my second favorite. Rod of Law, so I'm really cool. That last question, Mr. McBlawface. Why use Creative Commons instead of OGL or a new license?
That's a good question. I think that the answer to it is the same reason they eventually just published 5.1 with the Creative Commons in the first place. And that is that after the scare where they said that they could revoke the old OGL, OGL kind of lost its trust as a safe harbor to some people, for sure, that it was like a place you could definitely stay and that you could put any product, even if it wasn't even that related to D&D, and it was always intended, and we had Ryan Dancy on the show, to be like, this is not a trick, we're not going to come gotcha later on, this is safe. And it lost that feeling of being safe to some people. And so CCBY is definitely safe. There's nothing they can do about it. And now that they've gone there once, I think they're going there again. And that's just what it is.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you're going to put something in a license, you have only two options. You either have to write your own license, which is incredibly expensive, time consuming, and costs a lot. And I mean, you can see how long Orc took. So they are just using Creative Commons, and they already went down that road, and they already used 5.1 under Creative Commons. So it's going to be very, very. It's they kind of put themselves in the spot, because if these new rules are nothing more than an update to the fifth edition rules, and it's not a new sixth edition, well, then they already have half the rules in Creative Commons. So what are they going to do? Have half the rules in Creative Commons and have half the rules not in Creative Commons? It's
Plus,
going to,
people liked Creative Commons. They
yeah,
did
it's going to be a
a survey
nightmare.
of it after they were getting very negative surveys about some of the other proposed changes, and it was very positive. I
Huh.
know I gave positive answers on the survey about Creative Commons as well. And so I think they just figured this is something people liked. It worked. There's no need to rock the boat by doing something else.
Yeah, and it's just cleaner and easier, and they're already there. So what are they going to do? Not use it? It's like they kind of they're kind of stuck. Unless they're coming out with a true sixth edition, which they're obviously not. They actually have. I don't know if they thought this through, but they're kind of stuck with everything they did with fifth edition last year, going forward. Until they make a clean break with a brand new edition with new rules, they're going to just have to keep using Creative Commons. They could have made a sixth edition Creative Commons, sorry, sixth edition SRD, but it would have been a pain in the neck, because then people would have just said, okay, it's the same rules, I'm keeping 5.1. I'm updating, so whatever. And by the way, you can use, someone pointed out, you can use 5.1 or 5.2. You don't
Yeah,
have to
they
use,
even directly said that.
Yeah, you can do either one. So, and here is the link real quick if you want to find it.
Yeah, you can read it yourself if you want to check it out. I think it's a good update. You can let us know in the comments if you agree.
Yep, let us know. Otherwise, come back on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We'll probably talk maybe more about this. Maybe talk.
I'm very curious about Vecna
I know.
on Wednesday.
I know. You hear about that book. I was like, I got to go find it because I live in New York. And you think in New York, there would be a hobby and game store everywhere. Oh, God, no. No. The only one that I can find that's selling it is it's not fantasy. I keep thinking fantasy grounds. It's not fantasy grounds. Is the complete strategist in Manhattan.
Oh, I mean that's one of the most famous ones in New York,
yeah,
right?
It's incredibly famous, but there's limited edition, so I got to get there right when they open, and I got to drive into Manhattan, to Midtown, Night's the last call, Derek.
Came in after you said it was the last question, asking for a TLDR. Well, you can watch earlier in the episode, but they gave a good update that everything's going to be in CCBY still for the 2024. So
here we go. The rules for the new rules.
Oh, well, wait. We need a Derek TLDR. So the most important thing should be first. They said they're still working on the older editions, like 4E, right. Derek.
4th edition. They didn't forget it. Okay, they said they're still working on it, and it looks like they might actually release the SRD to Creative Commons for 4th edition. They mention it in a little update, and they also mentioned that all the new rules are going to be in Creative Commons, and they're updating the SRD from 5.1 to 5.2. There you go. That's
succinct.
Well, Derek, if you watch we talk about 4th edition quite a bit, so you just got to watch it, man. Stop being late. Got to turn on those little alerts if you guys want to be, because we now I was saying that, remember last time I was saying it was very quiet, but now the summer's coming up. There's probably gonna be a lot more of these like emergency updates that we just do, so make sure you turn on all the alerts, because I basically came on, so read this, and we did this 15 minutes after I read it, so you might want to make sure your alerts on for Roll for Combat. Anyhow, Mark has to eat. I got to go play tennis. And then I'm running.
And Derek has to go to racquetball.
And Derek has to go to racquetball. And also, I am running tonight at 9 on the channel. If you want to see I was going to say Knights of Last Call. If you want to see the Roll for Combat crew, we are still in Agents of Absalon. We are finishing up. They broke out of the prison, and now they have to find who framed them for murder, most foul, and they have to clear their names. And it's going to get ugly. I'll leave it at that.
Should be fun.
It'll be fun. So if you want to watch
All right. Take care, everyone. Be sure to check that out if you're interested. And until next time, if you want to battle the zoo, you have to roll for combat.
See you Wednesday.